Berlin, November 1918. The German Empire is falling apart, and power is up for grabs. German soldiers mutiny in Kiel, refusing to be sent to certain death in a pointless war. Factory workers seize control of production, and red banners appear over government buildings. The revolution has begun. For a moment, history stands at a precipice. The German working class, the most organized and politically advanced in Europe, has a real chance to take power. Inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, workers' councils are forming across the country. The German Communist Party, led by figures like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, sees an opportunity to build socialism in an advanced industrial nation, proving once and for all that Marxism is not just a theory for agrarian states like Russia, but a universal system capable of restructuring the world economy. But the revolution never reaches its full potential. It is betrayed, not just by the ruling class, who naturally fear the loss of their wealth, but by the so-called moderates, the Social Democratic Party, or SPD. They step in not to advance the revolution, but to kill it. Under the guise of protecting democracy, they conspire with the reactionary generals, unleashing the Freikorps, far-right armed paramilitary thugs, to exterminate the left. The workers' republics of Berlin, Munich, and Bremen are drowned in blood. Rosa Luxemburg is beaten and shot with her body dumped in a canal, and the revolution then dies in its infancy. But what if it hadn't? What if the workers' councils had survived? And what if the revolution had won? This is the Left Library, and today we ask, how would a socialist Germany have looked? How could it have developed? And how would it have changed world history? The Communist Party of Germany, or KPD, was not a loose collection of radicals. It was an organization armed with theory and a concrete vision for socialist development. It was influenced deeply by Marx, Engels, and Lenin, but also by Germany's unique economic conditions. Unlike Russia, Germany was already an advanced industrial power. It had a massive working class, concentrated in urban centres, and a developed banking and railway system that could be repurposed for socialist planning. The KPD's strategy was clear: nationalize the commanding heights of the economy, integrate workers' councils into direct control of industry, and transition into a planned economy based on rational, scientific development rather than capitalist market chaos. The first task would be the expropriation of banks and heavy industry. The German economy in 1918 was dominated by a handful of industrial cartels, such as Krupp, Thyssen, and IG Farben, who held the true power behind the scenes. The KPD had no illusions about reforming capitalism. The only path forward was complete worker control. Factories would be placed under the management of workers' councils, eliminating the parasitic capitalist class while maintaining industrial production. To sustain the revolution, the KPD planned to align with Soviet Russia, forming an economic and military alliance that would break Germany's dependency on Western capital. Lenin himself saw socialist Germany as the missing piece in the global struggle. If Germany joined the revolution, socialism would no longer be isolated in backward, war-torn countries, but would be rooted in an industrial heartland, accelerating global proletarian revolution. The failures of war communism in Russia, due in part to economic isolation, would not be repeated in Germany, where production could be rationally coordinated from the outset. The decentralized Soviet system of worker governance would be structured differently from the Soviet model. The KPD envisioned a dual system of power: centralized planning at the national level, with factory and municipal councils retaining control over local production and administration. This would prevent bureaucratic stagnation while ensuring efficiency. Politically, The new workers' state would abolish the Weimar parliamentary system in favour of direct democracy through workers' councils, dismantling the bourgeois state machinery entirely. Unlike the hesitant half measures of the SPD, which left capitalist institutions intact, the KPD understood that true socialism required the complete destruction of the old order. The judiciary, military, and bureaucracy, all of which had remained loyal to the Kaiser, would be purged and replaced with revolutionary institutions. On the agrarian front, the KPD had learned from the failures of Russian collectivization and planned a gradual integration of peasant agriculture into socialist production. Large estates owned by aristocrats would be expropriated and redistributed, while small farmers would be encouraged to form cooperative farms with mechanization and state support ensuring increased yields. This would prevent the food crises that plagued the early Soviet development. And with these foundations in place, Germany would become the industrial and economic core of world socialism. The socialist Germany in 1919 would have triggered immediate crises across the capitalist world. The Treaty of Versailles, which in our timeline crippled Germany with war reparations, would have never been implemented. Instead of being forced into economic submission, Germany would realign itself towards revolutionary internationalism. The first to feel these effects would be France and Britain, whose economies were already weakened by the war. The German Revolution would inspire workers across Europe to rise. French and British soldiers, many of whom sympathized with socialism, would be less willing to suppress uprisings at home. General strikes, mass protests, and mutinies in the colonies would erupt, forcing European imperialism into an existential crisis. In Britain, the growing power of the trade unions and socialist movements would be emboldened by Germany's transformation. The Labour Party, which in our timeline remained a capitalist force, might have radicalised under pressure, leading to direct confrontations with the British ruling class. The Irish War of Independence, which was already underway in 1919, would likely have received German support, hastening the collapse of British rule. In France, where the working class was already deeply influenced by syndicalist and communist ideas, a German revolution could have tipped the balance towards mass insurrection. The ruling class, knowing this, would have faced a choice: attempt to crush Germany militarily or suppress their own population first. Either way, France's grip on its empire, particularly in Algeria and Indochina, would weaken decades earlier than it did in our timeline. Italy, where the left had briefly seized control of factories during the Vienna Rosso of 1919 to 1920, would have likely seen an intensified struggle. Instead of fascism rising under Mussolini, the Italian Socialist Party, backed by Socialist Germany, might have successfully taken power. Without a fascist counter-revolution in Germany, the Nazis never rise. Without a Nazi Germany, there is no World War II as we know it. Instead of an era of imperialist warfare, the 20th century might have been defined by accelerating global class struggle, with workers taking power across Europe and beyond. And with Germany supporting colonial independence movements, the British, French, and Belgian empires might have collapsed far earlier. A world where India gained independence in the 1920s, where Africa is not divided by imperialist exploitation for another century, and where the Cold War as we know it never happens. And this is the world that could have been. The crushing of the German Revolution was not inevitable. It was not the result of historical mistakes or bad luck. It was the result of a conscious, vilest counter-revolution led by social democracy, fascism, and international capitalism. The workers' councils were dismantled, the left was decimated, and Germany was forced into a fragile parliamentary system that left the true power of capital untouched. But this struggle did not end in 1919. The KPD, though bloodied, did not disappear. Throughout the early years of the Weimar Republic, the communists continued to organize, fighting against a system that had been built to deny them power. The economic collapse of the early 1920s, made worse by the harsh reparations imposed by Versailles, reignited revolutionary momentum. The hyperinflation crisis radicalized the working class once again, and by 1923, Germany stood on the edge of another great revolution. In Saxony and Thuringia, the workers' movement surged forward, establishing proletarian strongholds in defiance of the Weimar government. In Hamburg, communist insurrections erupted in the streets. The KPD believed that the time had come for a second revolution, one that would finally succeed where the first had failed. But the German ruling class, having learned from 1919, was prepared. The SPD, once again siding with capital, worked hand in hand with the military and the Freikorps to stamp out the uprising before it could spread. The insurrections were crushed, the leaders were arrested, and the last real opportunity for socialism in Germany was extinguished. The failure of 1923 set the stage for what followed, with the left shattered and the working class demoralized. The reactionary forces waiting in the wings saw their moment. Within a decade, the stormtroopers who had been used to crush the revolution would march under Hitler's banners. The same generals who repressed the workers would swear loyalty to the Third Reich. The capitalists who feared socialism would finance fascism instead. History did not have to go this way, but it did, and we still live with its consequences. Until next time, this has been the Left Library, in solidarity.